I thought family meant forever until I held that hospital bill with my name alone on it while they all pretended I didn't exist. My name is Sarah. I'm 52, and for the past 15 years I believed I had found my place in this world. I work as a dental hygienist in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, where the desert heat makes everything feel permanent and unchanging. My small ranch house sits on Maple Street, with its carefully maintained front yard and the swing on the porch where I used to sit every evening, watching my neighbors water their lawns and walk their dogs. Life felt predictable, safe, wrapped in the warm embrace of what I thought was unconditional love. It all started when I married David 15 years ago. He came as a package deal. Not just a husband, but an entire family ecosystem that I desperately wanted to belong to. His sister Monica, sharp-tongued but supposedly protective. His mother Eleanor, who smelled like lavender and made the world's best apple pie. His brother Jake, the family joker who could make anyone laugh even on their worst day. And then there were the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, this sprawling network of people who gathered every Sunday for dinner at Eleanor's house, where the dining room table groaned under the weight of casseroles and stories and laughter that echoed off the walls. I had grown up an only child. My parents died in a car accident when I was 28, and for years I floated through life like a ghost, going through the motions but never really belonging anywhere. When David's family embraced me, or so I thought, it felt like coming home after years of wandering in the cold. They called me sister, daughter, aunt. They saved my seat at the dinner table and asked my opinion on everything from politics to pie recipes. I thought I had finally found my tribe. For 15 years, I showed up. I showed up for every birthday party, with homemade gifts that took me hours to create. I showed up for every holiday, bringing my famous green bean casserole and staying late to help wash dishes. I showed up when Monica's husband left her, sleeping on her couch for a week and holding her while she cried. I showed up when Jake lost his job, quietly slipping him grocery money without making it feel like charity. I showed up when Eleanor had her first heart attack, camping out in that sterile hospital waiting room for 3 days straight, holding David's hand and whispering prayers to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in. But most of all, I showed up with my wallet. It started small, covering the tip at family dinners when everyone mysteriously ran out of cash, picking up groceries for Sunday gatherings when money was tight for others. Then it grew. Monica's car repair, Jake's rent when he was between jobs, Eleanor's medication co-pays, the family vacation to Yellowstone where somehow everyone forgot to bring their share of the cabin rental fee each time. I told myself this was what family did. We looked out for each other. We covered for each other. We made sure no one fell through the cracks. The Sunday dinners continued like clockwork. Every week, I'd drive the 12 minutes from my house to Eleanor's, usually stopping at the grocery store first to pick up something they'd forgotten or couldn't afford. The smell of her kitchen would hit me as soon as I walked through that front door. Onions sautéing, bread baking, coffee percolating in that ancient pot she refused to replace. The sound of voices would wash over me like a warm wave, and I'd feel that familiar flutter of belonging in my chest. But looking back now, I can see the signs I chose to ignore. The way conversations sometimes stopped when I walked into a room. The inside jokes that everyone seemed to understand, except me. The way they'd make plans right in front of me, but somehow the invitation never quite materialized. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was looking for problems where none existed. Family was complicated, I reasoned. Every family had its dynamics. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday in March. I had stopped by Monica's house to drop off some leftover soup. She'd been battling a persistent cold, and I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I knocked, but no one answered, so I used the key she'd given me years ago for emergencies. The voices got clearer as I approached the kitchen, and I froze when I heard my own name. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," Monica was saying, her voice tired and strained. "Sarah's getting too comfortable, you know? Like she thinks she's actually one of us." My hand stopped halfway to the door handle. The ceramic container of soup suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my arms. "She's useful, though," came Jake's voice, followed by the sound of a beer can opening. "Who else is going to pay for Mom's birthday party next week? You know none of us have that kind of money right now." A bitter laugh from Monica. Oh, she'll pay. She always does. Did you see how fast she whipped out her credit card for the cabin rental? Like she was just waiting for the chance to prove herself. Sometimes I feel bad about it, came a third voice, David's cousin Rebecca. She seems so grateful just to be included. That's exactly the problem, Monica snapped. She's trying too hard. It's pathetic, honestly. Like, we get it, you don't have a real family, but that doesn't mean you can just buy your way into ours. The soup container slipped from my numb fingers and shattered against the tile floor, the sound echoing through the sudden silence. I heard quick footsteps, and then Monica appeared in the doorway, her face flushing red when she saw me standing there surrounded by broken ceramic and cooling soup. Sarah, how long have you been? But I was already backing toward the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. I brought soup, I managed to whisper, then turned and ran. I drove home in a daze, their words playing on repeat in my head. Trying to buy your way in, pathetic, not actually one of us. 15 years of believing I belonged, and it had all been an elaborate performance. But even then, even with their cruel words echoing in my skull, I made excuses for them. They were just having a bad day. Monica was stressed about money. They didn't really mean it. That night, David came home late from work and found me sitting on our couch, staring at the wall. I almost told him what I'd heard, almost let the words spill out, but something held me back. Some instinct for self-preservation, maybe. Instead, I asked him casually how his day had been, if he'd talked to his sister. Oh yeah, Monica called, he said, not looking up from his phone. She said you stopped by, but had to leave quickly. Something about dropping something? He knew. Of course he knew. They'd probably all had a good laugh about it after I left. Poor Sarah, so desperate to belong that she'd stand there and take their insults just for the chance to keep pretending she was family. But I didn't say anything. I just nodded and went to bed, where I lay awake until 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many other conversations there had been, how many times they'd dissected my neediness, my desperation, my pathetic attempts to buy my way into their hearts. The next few weeks passed in a strange haze. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners, kept bringing my green bean casserole, kept laughing at Jake's jokes and asking about Eleanor's health. But now I was watching, really watching, for the first time in 15 years. I saw how they'd exchanged glances when I offered to pay for something. I noticed how quickly they accepted my money, how smoothly they'd steer conversations toward their financial problems when I was around. I saw how they'd make plans for movies or shopping trips and somehow never quite get around to inviting me. It was like seeing a magic trick explained. Once you knew how it worked, you couldn't unsee the manipulation. Every family gathering became a performance where I played the role of the generous outsider, grateful for any scraps of inclusion they threw my way. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in April. David's phone rang during dinner and I watched his face go pale as he answered. "We'll be right there," he said, hanging up and grabbing his keys. "Mom's in the hospital, heart attack." The next 18 hours blurred together in a chaos of fluorescent lights, uncomfortable waiting room chairs, and the antiseptic smell that seems to cling to every surface in a hospital. Eleanor was stable but needed emergency surgery, a triple bypass that would cost more than anyone in the family had ever seen at one time. We sat in that waiting room like refugees, clutching coffee cups and taking turns pacing the hallway. Monica looked haggard, her usually perfect hair hanging limp around her face. Jake kept cracking nervous jokes that fell flat in the sterile air. David sat with his head in his hands, and I rubbed his back in slow circles, whispering empty reassurances that everything would be okay. When the surgeon finally emerged, still in his scrubs, we all stood up like synchronized swimmers. Eleanor had made it through the surgery, but she'd need weeks of recovery and intensive follow-up care. The surgeon handed David a clipboard, thick with paperwork, and I caught a glimpse of the numbers at the bottom of the insurance forms. Even with Medicare, the family's portion would be enormous, more than any of them could manage. "We'll figure it out," David said quietly, but I could hear the panic underneath his calm voice. "We always do." That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Standing there in that hospital hallway, surrounded by the people I'd spent 15 years believing were my family, I pulled out my checkbook. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "All of it. Eleanor doesn't need to worry about money while she's recovering." The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Monica actually started crying. Jake hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. David kissed my forehead and whispered, "Thank you," over and over like a prayer. For a moment I felt that old familiar warmth, that sense of being needed and appreciated. But there was something else underneath it now, a cold, calculating awareness that I was once again playing my assigned role. The family ATM, the convenient outsider with the deep pockets and desperate need to belong. I wrote the check for $47,000. Eleanor's entire out-of-network costs, plus the follow-up care the insurance wouldn't cover. It was more money than I'd ever spent on anything except my house, wiping out most of my carefully hoarded savings in one stroke of the pen. Eleanor cried when I told her not to worry about the bills. She held my hand in her papery grip and called me her daughter, said she didn't know what the family would do without me. David squeezed my shoulder and said I was an angel. Monica hugged me and whispered that she was sorry for being so stressed lately, that family was complicated, but love was simple. I felt like a fraud accepting their gratitude, but I also felt something else, a grim satisfaction that I was finally seeing the game clearly. They needed me now, they owed me now, and for the first time in 15 years, I held some cards of my own. Eleanor came home after 2 weeks, and the family rallied around her recovery. Someone was always at her house, helping with meals and medications, and the endless parade of doctor's appointments. I took more days off work than I could afford, spending long afternoons sitting by her bed, reading to her from romance novels, and listening to stories about David's childhood that I'd heard a dozen times before. But even as we all focused on Eleanor's health, I noticed things, small things, like how quickly the conversations moved away from the hospital bills whenever I wasn't around, like how no one ever mentioned paying me back, not even in vague future terms, like how they'd resumed their old patterns of inside jokes and subtle exclusions, as if my $47,000 gesture had simply been the price of admission to stay in their good graces for another round. 3 weeks after Eleanor came home, I was helping her organize her medications when I heard voices from the kitchen. She was napping, so I crept closer to hear what Monica and Jake were discussing in low, urgent tones. "She's getting weird about it," Monica was saying, "like possessive or something. Did you see how she rearranged Mom's pills? Like we don't know how to take care of our own mother." "Maybe she thinks because she paid for everything, she gets to call the shots now," Jake replied. "I saw her watching us at dinner Sunday, like she was keeping score or something." "God, I hope she doesn't think this makes her more family than she was before," Monica continued, "because it doesn't. Money is money, but blood is blood, you know?" I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. There it was again, that casual cruelty, that easy dismissal of everything I'd given them. Not just the money, but 15 years of showing up, of caring, of trying so hard to earn a place at their table. "Do you think she expects us to pay her back?" Jake asked, and I heard Monica snort. "With what?" And honestly, she knew what she was doing when she wrote that check. Nobody forced her. If she wanted a business transaction, she should have said so up front. "David says she's been acting different lately, more, I don't know, distant." "Good. Maybe she's finally learning some boundaries. I love her, I do, but sometimes it's exhausting how much she needs us to validate her existence. I slipped away before they could discover me eavesdropping, but their words followed me home like smoke. Money is money, but blood is blood. After everything, after 15 years of devotion, after $47,000, after sleepless nights in hospital waiting rooms, I was still the outsider looking in. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a calculator and a pile of receipts, adding up 15 years of family expenses. The Yellowstone cabin, Monica's car repairs, Jake's rent payments, Eleanor's medications, birthday parties and Christmas gifts and grocery runs and restaurant tips. Thousands and thousands of dollars, given freely and never questioned, never tracked, never expected to be repaid. The total was staggering. Over the years, I had spent more than $90,000 on David's family. $90,000 to buy myself a seat at a table where I was merely tolerated, where my presence was endured rather than celebrated, where my desperate need to belong was a source of amusement and mild embarrassment. But as I sat there surrounded by receipts and brutal calculations, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. The crushing pain of Monica's words, the sharp sting of their casual dismissal, it was fading into something cleaner and colder, something that felt almost like relief. For the first time in 15 years, I could see them clearly. Not as the loving family I desperately wanted them to be, but as they actually were, people who had taken advantage of my loneliness and generosity without ever offering genuine acceptance in return. People who had let me pay their bills and solve their problems while making jokes about my pathetic need to belong. I thought about Eleanor, recovering in her bedroom from surgery that I had paid for, probably never wondering where the money had come from or what it had cost me. I thought about Monica and Jake, so casually discussing my emotional boundaries while living in houses I had helped them keep. I thought about David, my husband, who had watched me hemorrhage money and self-respect for his family's sake and never once stood up for me or acknowledged what I was sacrificing. That's when I started to plan. It wasn't a grand scheme, nothing dramatic or movie-worthy, just a quiet, methodical withdrawal from the elaborate performance I'd been giving for 15 years. I started small, testing the waters. I skipped the next Sunday dinner, claiming a headache. No one called to check on me. I forgot to bring Monica's birthday gift the following week. She noticed, but only to make a passive-aggressive comment about how busy everyone was these days. Eleanor needed a ride to a doctor's appointment, and for the first time ever I said I couldn't do it. I had to work. The appointment got rescheduled because no one else in the family could manage to rearrange their schedule, and I felt a tiny spark of satisfaction at their inconvenience. But the real test came when Jake called with his usual monthly crisis. This time it was his car insurance. He'd let it lapse and gotten pulled over, and now he needed to pay a hefty fine plus catch up on his premiums or risk losing his license. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said, his voice carefully calibrated to hit that note between desperation and casual confidence that had worked on me so many times before. "But you know I'm good for it, and I just need to get through this month." In the past, I would have been writing the check before he finished speaking, grateful to be needed, eager to solve another family crisis. But now I heard something different in his voice, the assumption that I would say yes, the certainty that Sarah the ATM would once again dispense the required funds without question or complaint. "I'm sorry, Jake," I said, and the words felt foreign in my mouth. "I can't help with this one." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to hear his confusion. "You can't, or you won't?" "I can't," I repeated, marveling at how simple it was to say. "I'm having my own financial difficulties right now." It wasn't entirely a lie. $47,000 was a significant chunk of my savings, and I was genuinely worried about my own financial security for the first time in years. But more than that, I was testing them. Would Jake ask what was wrong? Would he offer help in return, or at least express concern about whatever difficulties I might be facing? Instead, he made an irritated noise. Well, that's just great. I guess I'll have to figure something else out. He hung up without asking what kind of difficulties I was having, without offering support or even basic sympathy. Just irritation that his usual solution wasn't available. I sat holding the silent phone, and instead of guilt or sadness, I felt something that might have been pride. The word must have spread through the family network, because over the next few days, I got a series of increasingly pointed calls. Monica wanted to know if everything was okay with David and me. Code for asking whether my sudden financial unavailability was a temporary glitch or a permanent problem. Eleanor called to chat about her recovery, but managed to work in several mentions of upcoming expenses and how worried she was about money. Even David seemed to be fishing for information, asking casual questions about my work and whether I was happy with our joint bank account setup. But nobody directly asked what was wrong. Nobody offered help. Nobody seemed to consider that maybe, after 15 years of being their financial safety net, I might need some support in return. They were all just trying to figure out when normal service would resume. I realized they had never seen me as a person with my own needs, dreams, or vulnerabilities. I was a function, not a family member, a resource to be managed, not a relationship to be nurtured. And once I saw it that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. The next Sunday dinner invitation came via David, delivered with a casualness that didn't quite mask his anxiety. "Mom's making pot roast," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She specifically asked if you were coming." I almost laughed. Eleanor's pot roast had been my favorite for 15 years, and suddenly it was being deployed like a weapon of emotional manipulation. But I just smiled and said I'd be there. I showed up empty-handed for the first time in 15 years. No green bean casserole, no dessert, no flowers for Eleanor or wine for the table. Just me walking through that familiar front door with nothing but myself to offer. The looks were immediate and unmistakable. Monica's quick glance at my empty hands, Jake's confused expression, Eleanor's disappointed face when she realized I hadn't brought anything. David looked mortified, probably imagining all the family gossip about his wife's sudden rudeness. But I just smiled and took my usual seat, acting as though nothing had changed. I complimented Eleanor on the pot roast, laughed at Jake's jokes, asked Monica about her job. I played the part of devoted family member while bringing absolutely nothing to the table except my presence. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were all waiting for me to jump up and offer to cover the tip, or mention that I'd pick up groceries for next week, or volunteer to handle some family expense that had come up. But I just sat there, eating pot roast and making pleasant conversation, contributing nothing but my attention. After dinner, I helped clear the table but didn't offer to wash dishes, another first. I kissed Eleanor's cheek and said goodbye, thanking her for the lovely meal, and walked out to my car while they all stood in the doorway looking confused and slightly betrayed. David was quiet on the drive home, and I could feel his anxiety radiating across the car like heat. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Is everything okay?" he asked carefully. "You seemed different tonight." "Different how?" I kept my voice light, curious. "I don't know. Distant, maybe? And you didn't bring anything which isn't like you." There it was. The thing that had bothered him most wasn't my mood or my demeanor. It was that I'd shown up empty-handed, that I'd failed to fulfill my unspoken obligation to provide something, anything, to justify my presence at his family's table. "I've been tired lately," I said, which was true enough. 15 years of tired, actually. He glanced at me, something flickering across his face that might have been understanding or might have been worry. Are we okay? You and me? It was the first time in months that he'd asked about our relationship instead of his family's comfort level. For a moment I felt a flutter of hope that maybe David was different, that maybe our marriage existed somewhere separate from his family's casual exploitation. I don't know, I said honestly. Are we? He was quiet for the rest of the drive home, and I wondered if he was finally starting to see the cracks in the foundation we'd built our life on, or if he was just worried about what his family would say if his wife stopped being their reliable source of financial support. The next few weeks settled into a strange new pattern. I continued to attend family events, but as a guest rather than a participant. I brought nothing, offered nothing, volunteered for nothing. I smiled and chatted and played my part, but I contributed only my presence, which seemed to confuse and frustrate everyone involved. Monica made increasingly pointed comments about how expensive everything was these days, how hard it was to afford family gatherings on their budgets. Jake mentioned his ongoing car troubles several times, always with a meaningful look in my direction. Eleanor talked constantly about her medical bills and how grateful she was to have family who cared about her well-being. But I just nodded sympathetically and changed the subject, offering nothing but emotional support, which, I was beginning to realize, they valued about as much as I thought they valued my money. The breaking point came at Jake's birthday party in June. It was held at a local restaurant, and as usual, when the bill arrived, everyone suddenly became very interested in their phones or the dessert menu. In the past, I would have smoothly handled the check, probably adding a generous tip and brushing off their half-hearted offers to split it. This time, I sat back and waited. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the server stood there with the bill, looking from face to face. Finally, Monica cleared her throat. "I guess we should figure out how to split this," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Good idea," I agreed pleasantly, making no move toward my purse. The next 10 minutes were excruciating as they fumbled through the math, counted out crumpled bills, and tried to figure out who owed what. Jake looked increasingly embarrassed as his family scraped together enough money to cover his birthday dinner, and I felt a satisfaction that was probably petty, but definitely justified. David paid our portion without comment, but I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. He was angry, not at his family for assuming I'd cover their expenses, but at me for failing to meet their expectations. The drive home was silent until we pulled into our driveway, and then David finally exploded. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, turning to face me in the dim light from the garage. "You just sat there and watched my family scramble to pay for dinner. That's not like you." "No," I agreed calmly. "It's not. For 15 years, it's not been like me." "So what's changed? Are you punishing us for something?" The word "us" hit me like a slap. Not them, us. David had just revealed exactly where his loyalties lay, and it wasn't with his wife. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, getting out of the car. "I'm just not paying for everyone anymore." "Why not?" He followed me into the house, his voice rising. "It's never been a problem before. You've always been generous with family." "Your family," I corrected. "I've been generous with your family." "They're your family too." I turned to look at him, this man I'd been married to for 15 years, and saw a stranger. Someone who had watched me empty my bank account and my heart for his family's benefit, and had never once questioned whether it was fair, whether it was healthy, whether it was sustainable. "No, David," I said quietly. "They're not, and apparently they never have been." I told him then about the conversations I'd overheard, about Monica's casual cruelty and Jake's assumption that I'd always be there to solve their problems. I told him about feeling like a walking ATM, about buying my way into family dinners and holiday gatherings, only to discover that my seat at the table had always been conditional on my continued financial usefulness. David listened with growing discomfort, shifting from foot to foot and running his hands through his hair. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. "Maybe you misunderstood," he said weakly. "Monica was probably just having a bad day. And Jake, well, you know how he is when he's stressed about money." Even then, even after everything I'd told him, he was making excuses for them, protecting them from accountability while leaving me standing alone in my own kitchen, defending my right to be treated with basic respect by the people who claimed to love me. "No, David," I said, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. "I understood perfectly. The question is, do you?" He opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he shook his head and walked toward the bedroom, pausing in the doorway to deliver what I'm sure he thought was the killing blow. "You're being selfish, Sarah. Family takes care of each other. That's what love looks like." I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by 15 years of memories and receipts and broken dreams, and realized that David was absolutely right about one thing. That was exactly what love looked like in his family. One-sided, conditional, and transactional. The kind of love that kept careful score of what you could provide, but never counted what you might need in return. But it wasn't what love looked like to me. Not anymore. The next morning, David left for work without speaking to me, and I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, making lists. Assets, debts, shared accounts, individual accounts. 15 years of financial entanglement that would need to be carefully untangled. It was overwhelming but also oddly liberating, like finally admitting that a relationship was over and discovering that the world didn't end. I thought about Eleanor, still recovering from surgery that I had paid for, probably wondering why I'd been so distant lately. I thought about Monica and Jake, scrambling to cover Jake's birthday dinner and no doubt complaining about my sudden stinginess. I thought about David, who had chosen his family's comfort over his wife's dignity, without even seeming to realize there was a choice to be made. And I thought about myself, 52 years old, sitting in a house I'd bought with money I'd earned, finally seeing clearly after 15 years of willful blindness. I had spent so much time and energy trying to buy my way into belonging that I'd forgotten what it felt like to belong to myself. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But old habits die hard, and I answered on the third ring. "Sarah, honey." Eleanor's voice was warm and slightly breathless, the way it had been since her surgery. "I was hoping you could do me a favor today." Here it was, another request, another opportunity to prove my usefulness, another chance to buy temporary acceptance with my time or money or both. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Well, Monica was supposed to drive me to my cardiology follow-up this afternoon, but she just called and said something came up at work. And Jake's car is acting up again, and David's in meetings all day." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I know it's short notice, but I was wondering if you might be free." 6 months ago, I would have been in my car before she finished asking. I would have rearranged my entire day, called in sick to work if necessary, done whatever it took to help Eleanor get to her appointment. Because that's what family did for each other. And I was so desperate to be family that I'd twisted myself into whatever shape was needed. But now I heard something else in her request. The casual assumption that of course I'd be available, that of course I'd drop everything to solve a problem that Monica and Jake had created by not managing their own responsibilities. The unspoken expectation that Sarah would handle it, because Sarah always handled everything. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," I said, and the words came easier this time. "I can't help with that today. I have plans." The silence on the other end of the line was sharp with surprise. "Oh, well, I suppose I could try to reschedule." "That sounds like a good idea," I agreed pleasantly. "I hope you can find something that works." "Sarah, Eleanor's voice had taken on a wounded tone that I recognized from years of family manipulation. "Is everything all right? You've seemed so distant lately, and David mentioned that you've been going through some things." There it was. The gentle probe, the invitation to confess whatever emotional problems were making me so unreliable lately. The assumption that my sudden unavailability was a temporary crisis rather than a permanent boundary. "Everything's fine," I lied smoothly. "I'm just learning to prioritize my own needs a little better." Another silence, longer this time. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice was cooler, more formal. "Well, I suppose we all have to do what we think is best." "We do," I agreed. "Give my love to everyone." I hung up before she could respond, and immediately felt the familiar flutter of guilt and anxiety. I had just refused to help an elderly woman get to a medical appointment. I had prioritized my own comfort over someone else's need. By any reasonable standard, I was being selfish and cruel. But I was learning to question those reasonable standards. Why was it my responsibility to solve problems that Monica and Jake had created? Why was I expected to be available as backup when the actual family members couldn't manage their commitments? Why did my selfishness matter more than their irresponsibility? The answer was simple, because it had always worked before. For 15 years, they had trained me to be their reliable solution, their go-to person for any crisis or inconvenience. They had taught me that my value lay in my availability, my generosity, my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. And I had been such an eager student that I'd graduated with honors in self-erasure, but I was done with that curriculum now. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "Mom says you can't help with her appointment today. Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a long moment, reading the subtext. Not concern for whatever might be preventing me from helping, but annoyance that their backup plan had fallen through. A demand for explanation disguised as caring inquiry. I typed back, "Yes, everything's fine, just busy today." Her response came quickly. "Too busy to help family?" And there it was, the guilt trip in all its naked manipulation. The implication that family obligations should supersede everything else in my life, that being too busy for Eleanor's needs was a moral failing rather than a simple scheduling conflict. I turned off my phone without responding. That afternoon, while Eleanor was presumably figuring out how to get to her rescheduled appointment without my help, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took care of myself. I got my hair cut and highlighted. I bought myself a new dress. I sat in a coffee shop and read a book without checking my phone every 5 minutes to see if someone in David's family needed something. It felt foreign and indulgent and absolutely wonderful. When I got home that evening, David was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a grim expression. He looked up when I walked in, taking in my new haircut and the shopping bags in my hands. "Mom called," he said without preamble. "She had to take a cab to her doctor's appointment because no one else could help her." I set down my bags and looked at him. That must have been inconvenient. "Inconvenient?" His voice rose. "Sarah, she's 73 years old and just had heart surgery. She shouldn't have to take a cab to medical appointments." "You're right," I agreed. "Her children should make sure she has reliable transportation to her appointments. We try, but sometimes things come up. Things like Monica's work schedule and Jake's car troubles." David flushed. "Yes, exactly. Life happens, and we count on each other to fill in the gaps." "You count on me to fill in the gaps," I corrected. "There's a difference." We stared at each other across the kitchen table, 15 years of unspoken agreements and assumed obligations hanging in the air between us. I could see the exact moment when David realized that something fundamental had shifted, that the reliable foundation of our family dynamic had developed serious cracks. "I don't understand what's happening," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "We've always been there for each other. It's what families do. No, David. I've always been there for them. When was the last time any of them were there for me? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I watched him mentally scroll through 15 years of family interactions, looking for examples of his family supporting me, helping me, putting my needs before their own. The silence stretched longer and longer as he came up empty. That's different, he said eventually. You've never needed help the way they have. It was such a perfect encapsulation of how they saw me that I almost laughed. In their minds, I was a person without needs, without struggles, without any legitimate claim on their time or resources. I was the strong one, the stable one, the one who had her life together well enough to support everyone else's chaos. Never mind that I'd grown up orphaned and alone. Never mind that I'd spent years building a life from nothing, working multiple jobs to put myself through school, saving every penny to buy my little house and create some security for myself. Never mind that I might have my own fears about growing older, about financial stability, about what would happen if I were the one who needed help someday. In their narrative, I was simply the person who gave, and they were the people who received. It was as natural and unquestioned as gravity. Everyone needs help sometimes, David, I said quietly. I just learned not to expect it from your family. He winced as if I'd slapped him, and I felt a moment of sympathy for the confusion I could see in his eyes. He genuinely didn't understand what had changed, couldn't see the casual cruelty in his family's treatment of me because it had always been there, as much a part of the landscape as Eleanor's Sunday dinners and Jake's perpetual financial crises. So what happens now? He asked. Do we just stop being family? It was a fair question, and I didn't have an easy answer. These people had been the center of my world for 15 years. Their approval had been my drug of choice. Their acceptance, the thing I'd chased with increasingly desperate generosity. Walking away from them meant walking away from the only family I'd known since my parents died, meant admitting that I'd wasted 15 years trying to buy love from people who were never selling it. But staying meant accepting that I would always be the outsider looking in, always scrambling to prove my worth, always one financial crisis away from losing my place at their table. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know it can't keep being what it was. David nodded slowly, and I could see him processing the implications. No more automatic financial support for his family's problems. No more reliable backup when their own plans fell through. No more Sarah absorbing the costs and inconveniences that made their lives run smoothly. They're going to be hurt, he said quietly. They're going to be inconvenienced, I corrected. There's a difference. That night, David and I ate dinner in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. He kept glancing at me as if he expected me to suddenly revert to my old self, to apologize for my recent behavior, and promise to start covering restaurant bills and driving Eleanor to appointments again. But I was done apologizing for taking up space, done promising to make myself smaller and more convenient. For the first time in 15 years, I was learning to prioritize my own needs, and it felt like coming back to life after a long, suffocating sleep. My phone buzzed throughout the evening with messages from various family members. Monica wanting to know if I was angry about something. Jake asking if I could help him figure out his car situation, since he couldn't afford the mechanic. Eleanor sending a passive-aggressive message about how hard it was to manage her recovery without family support. I read each message and felt nothing but a distant sort of pity for people who had gotten so comfortable with my generosity that they couldn't imagine functioning without it. They were like children who had never learned to tie their own shoes because someone had always done it for them. But I was done being their someone. The real test came 2 weeks later, when Monica called with genuine panic in her voice. Her son Tyler, my nephew, who I'd helped support through college, had been in a car accident. He was alive but badly injured, facing multiple surgeries and a long recovery. The family was rallying to support him, but the medical costs were going to be astronomical. Sarah, Monica's voice was thick with tears. I know things have been weird lately, but Tyler needs us now. All of us. Can we count on you? For a moment I wavered. Tyler was a good kid, and I genuinely cared about him. The thought of him lying in a hospital bed, facing a mountain of medical debt that could ruin his young life, made my chest tight with sympathy. But then I thought about my own depleted savings, wiped out just months ago by Eleanor's surgery. I thought about 15 years of always being the one who could be counted on, never the one who needed to be supported. I thought about Monica's cruel words about my pathetic need to belong, and Jake's casual assumption that I'd always be there to solve their problems. I'm sorry, Monica, I said, and meant it. I can't help financially right now, but I'll be there for Tyler in other ways. I can sit with him, help with meals, whatever he needs that doesn't involve money. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Monica finally spoke, her voice was cold and sharp. I see. So when it really matters, when family really needs you, you're suddenly unavailable. I've been available for 15 years, I replied calmly. Right now I need to take care of my own financial security. Your financial security? Monica's voice rose. Tyler is lying in a hospital bed and you're worried about your retirement fund. It was a masterful guilt trip, perfectly crafted to make me feel selfish and heartless for prioritizing my own needs over their crisis. In the past, it would have worked. I would have hung up and immediately written another check, apologizing for my momentary selfishness and promising to do better. But now I heard the manipulation clearly, saw how easily she weaponized Tyler's pain to extract money from me. It was the same pattern that had played out dozens of times over the years, just with higher stakes and sharper emotional blackmail. I hope Tyler recovers quickly, I said. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to help. I hung up before she could respond, and immediately called the hospital to send flowers to Tyler's room. It was a small gesture, but it felt important to show that my refusal to bankroll his recovery didn't mean I didn't care about his well-being. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with messages from the entire family network. David's cousins expressing disappointment in my selfishness. Eleanor sending a long, wounded text about how she'd thought of me as a daughter but was beginning to wonder if she'd been wrong. Jake calling me directly to ask what had happened to the woman who used to care about family. But the worst was David's reaction when he came home that evening. He walked through the door with the look of a man who'd spent the day fielding phone calls from his disappointed relatives, and I could see the weight of their expectations pressing down on his shoulders. They think you hate them, he said without preamble, dropping his keys on the counter with more force than necessary. I don't hate them. Then why won't you help Tyler? He's just a kid, Sarah. He didn't do anything to deserve this. You're right, he didn't. And I'm not punishing Tyler, I'm protecting myself. David stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Protecting yourself from what? From spending the rest of my life being your family's emergency fund, while never being treated like an actual family member. That's not... He started, then stopped. Okay, maybe they haven't always been perfect, but they love you. We all do. No, David, they love what I can do for them. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the cognitive dissonance of loving people who had treated his wife like a convenient resource for 15 years. So what do you want? He asked finally. An apology? Some kind of acknowledgement? It was such a small question, but it revealed everything about how he saw the situation. He thought this was about wounded pride, about wanting credit or recognition for my generosity. He couldn't conceive that it was about basic human dignity, about being valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. I want to be treated like family, I said simply, not like the family ATM. You are family. When did they last ask how I was doing? When did they last offer to help me with anything? When did they last include me in plans without expecting me to pay for them? Again, that long silence, as David tried to come up with examples and found none. They're not perfect, he said eventually, but they're family. You don't get to choose your family, you just love them anyway. I did choose them, David. For 15 years, I chose them every single day. I chose to show up, to care, to support them even when they made it clear that I was an outsider. But I'm done choosing people who would never choose me back. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with 15 years of accumulated hurt and disappointment. I could see David processing what I'd said, beginning to understand that this wasn't a temporary mood or a phase I was going through. This was a fundamental shift in who I was willing to be and what I was willing to accept. If you won't help Tyler, he said quietly, then I will. I'll take money from our joint account. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it wasn't not a threat either. David was making it clear that if I wouldn't voluntarily fund his family's crisis, he'd find another way to make it happen. That account has both our names on it, I replied calmly. We both have the right to use it. So you're okay with me emptying our savings for Tyler's medical bills? I'm okay with you making your own choices about your own money and living with the consequences. He studied my face, looking for some sign that I was bluffing, that I'd back down if pushed hard enough, but I held his gaze steadily, and after a moment, he seemed to realize that I meant exactly what I'd said. This isn't who you are, Sarah, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. You're not cold. You're not selfish. I don't know what's happened to you, but this isn't you. For 15 years, I'd been so focused on becoming the person David's family needed me to be that I'd forgotten who I actually was. The generous woman who paid their bills, the reliable backup who solved their problems, the grateful outsider who was so happy to be included that she never questioned the terms of her inclusion. That wasn't the real me. That was a character I'd created to win love from people who were never going to give it. You're right, I said. This isn't who I've been, but it might be who I actually am. That was 6 months ago, and I can see now that it was the beginning of the end of everything I'd built my life around. David did take money from our joint account for Tyler's medical bills, not all of it, but enough to make his point. The family was grateful to him in a way they'd never been grateful to me, praising his loyalty and sacrifice while treating my refusal to contribute as a personal betrayal. Tyler recovered, thankfully, but the family dynamics never did. Sunday dinners continued without me, the empty chair at Eleanor's table serving as a silent accusation. David attended faithfully, coming home each week with reports of their disappointment in my continued absence, their confusion about my sudden coldness, their hope that I'd eventually come to my senses and return to the fold. But I was finally seeing clearly, and what I saw was that there was no fold for me to return to. There never had been. I'd been hovering at the edges for 15 years, mistaking proximity for belonging, confusing financial utility with familial love. The hardest part wasn't their rejection. It was David's slow realization that he had to choose between his wife and his family, and that he wasn't sure which choice he wanted to make. He loved me, I believed that, but he'd never had to love me in opposition to his family's wishes before. Our entire relationship had been built on the assumption that I would always accommodate their needs, always bend myself to fit their expectations. Now that I'd stopped bending, everything was breaking. So here I am, 52 years old and finally learning to prioritize my own needs over other people's wants. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure, like learning to walk all over again after years of crawling. But I have a feeling this story is just beginning, because the thing about finally standing up for yourself is that you discover muscles you'd forgotten you had. And once you remember how to use them, it becomes impossible to go back to crawling. The question isn't whether I'll survive losing David's family. I know I will. The question is whether David will choose to build something new with me, or whether he'll choose to stay trapped in the old patterns that served everyone except his wife. Either way, I'm done being anyone's emergency fund. I'm done buying my way into relationships that were never for sale. I'm done being grateful for scraps from tables where I was never really welcome. Parte 2. 3 months later, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office, signing divorce papers that feel both inevitable and surreal. The woman across from me, Patricia Chen, family law attorney, slides the final documents across her mahogany desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who's guided hundreds of people through the end of their marriages. "The house will be yours outright," she says, pointing to a line of legal text that dissolves 15 years of shared ownership into clean, separate assets. "Since you can prove the down payment came from your individual savings before the marriage, and you've been making the majority of the mortgage payments, the judge agreed it was equitable." I nod and sign my name with a steady hand, though inside I'm marveling at how a life can be reduced to property divisions and account splits. David gets the newer car. I keep the house. He takes his retirement fund. I keep mine. We split the joint savings, what's left of it after Tyler's medical bills, down the middle like splitting a restaurant check. It's all very civilized, very reasonable, very unlike the messy emotional battlefield our marriage had become over the past year. The final break had come 6 weeks ago, on what should have been just another quiet Tuesday evening. David had walked through our front door with the defeated posture of a man carrying invisible weight, and I'd known immediately that something significant had shifted. "Mom's in the hospital again," he'd said without preamble, setting his keys on the kitchen counter with careful precision. "Another heart episode. They're saying she needs a pacemaker." I'd felt the familiar flutter of concern. Despite everything, I genuinely cared about Eleanor. But I'd also felt something else, a kind of weary recognition, like watching a movie you'd seen too many times before. "I'm sorry to hear that," I'd said and meant it. "Is she stable?" "For now. But the pacemaker surgery, insurance will cover most of it, but there's still going to be significant out-of-pocket costs, and she'll need help during recovery, probably someone staying with her for a few weeks." He'd paused there, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and resignation. We both knew what came next in the old script. I would volunteer to help with the costs, offer to take time off work to care for Eleanor, step seamlessly back into my role as the family's reliable problem solver. But I just nodded sympathetically and waited for him to continue. "Monica's been looking into home health aides, but they're expensive. And Jake? Well, you know Jake can't contribute much financially right now." Another pause, another meaningful look. David was giving me every opportunity to volunteer, to slip back into the comfortable pattern of Sarah fixes everything that had defined our relationship for so long. Instead, I'd asked, "What are you thinking of doing?" The question had clearly frustrated him. "I don't know, Sarah. What do you think we should do?" There it was, the expectation that I would somehow solve this problem, that my withdrawal from family financial support had been a temporary aberration rather than a permanent boundary. "It sounds like Monica and Jake need to figure out how to care for their mother," I'd said calmly. "They're her children. It's their responsibility." David's face had gone through a series of emotions, surprise, disappointment, and finally something that looked like anger. "She's been your mother-in-law for 15 years, he'd said, his voice tight with frustration. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It means I hope she recovers quickly and has good support from her family during her recovery." "We are her family. You, me, all of us." But I'd shaken my head, finally ready to say the words that had been building in my throat for months. "No, David. You're her family. I'm just the person who used to pay for things." He'd stared at me as if I'd grown a second head, and I'd realized that even after everything, all the conversations, all the boundaries I'd tried to establish, all the times I'd explained how his family's treatment made me feel, he still genuinely believed that I was being unreasonably cold. "I don't understand you anymore," he'd said quietly. "The woman I married wouldn't hesitate to help family in a medical crisis." "The woman you married was desperate to be accepted by people who never had any intention of accepting her," I'd replied. "I'm not that woman anymore." That night, David had called his siblings to discuss Eleanor's care, and I'd listened from the kitchen as he explained the situation in carefully neutral terms. Yes, the pacemaker was expensive. No, Sarah wouldn't be contributing financially this time. No, he didn't know why I'd become so resistant to helping family. The conversation had lasted over an hour, and I'd heard the frustration in all their voices as they grappled with the reality of managing Eleanor's care without my automatic financial and logistical support. They'd eventually worked out a plan. Monica would take family leave to care for Eleanor, Jake would contribute what he could toward the medical costs, and David would cover the remainder using his individual retirement savings. It was a reasonable solution, the kind of plan that adult children make when their parent needs care. But the resentment in David's voice, when he'd described it to me afterward, made it clear that he viewed it as an unnecessary hardship caused by my selfishness. "Mom's scared," he'd said, sitting heavily on our couch. "She keeps asking why you haven't come to visit her in the hospital." I'd felt a familiar stab of guilt at that. Eleanor was 73 and facing surgery, and I was staying away out of my own emotional self-preservation. By any normal standard of human decency, I should have been there, but I'd learned to question those normal standards, to ask whose interests they really served. "What did you tell her?" I'd asked. "I told her you've been busy with work, but she's not stupid, Sarah. She knows something's changed." Something has changed. I'm not pretending to be family with people who don't consider me family. David had been quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he'd finally looked up at me, his expression had been sad and somehow final. "I need to ask you something," he'd said, "and I need you to be honest with me." I'd nodded, bracing myself. "Do you want to be married to me anymore?" The question had hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to ignore or wave away. I'd opened my mouth to give some diplomatic answer, some version of "it's complicated" that would buy us more time to work through our problems. But then I'd realized that I was tired of diplomatic answers, tired of protecting other people's feelings at the expense of my own truth. "I don't know," I'd said honestly. "I want to be married to someone who sees me as his partner, not as his family's financial resource. I want to be married to someone who would choose my well-being over his family's convenience, at least sometimes. I don't know if that person is you." David had flinched as if I'd slapped him, but he hadn't argued. Instead, he'd sat there for a long time, processing what I'd said. "They raised me," he'd said eventually. "Monica and Jake and Mom. They took care of me when I was too young to take care of myself. How am I supposed to just stop caring about their problems?" "I'm not asking you to stop caring. I'm asking you to stop expecting me to solve every problem they have." "But that's what marriage is," he'd protested. "We're a team. We support each other's families." "When have they ever supported me, David? When have any of them ever put my needs before their wants?" Again, that long silence as he'd searched for examples that didn't exist. "It's not about keeping score," he'd said finally, but his voice had lacked conviction. "You're right. It's not about keeping score. It's about basic reciprocity. It's about being valued for who I am, not what I can provide." That conversation had been 6 weeks ago, and we'd both known it was the beginning of the end. David had moved into the guest room the next day, and we'd spent the following weeks navigating the strange territory of two people who still cared about each other, but could no longer live together. The divorce itself had been surprisingly amicable. We'd both wanted to avoid the kind of bitter legal battle that would have enriched only our lawyers and we'd been able to reach agreements on most issues without too much drama. David would keep his relationship with his family exactly as it had always been, and I would be free to build a life that didn't revolve around earning their approval. Now, sitting in Patricia Chen's office, I'm signing the last of the papers that will legally untangle 15 years of shared life. It should feel devastating, but instead I feel something that might be relief. There's one more thing, Patricia says, pulling out a manila folder. Your husband's family has been trying to contact you through his attorney. Apparently they'd like to speak with you before the divorce is finalized. I look at the folder without taking it. What kind of speak? I'm not sure. The message just said they'd like to have a conversation. Something about clearing the air before you. And I quote, "Leave the family permanently." I almost laugh at the phrase. Leave the family permanently, as if I'd ever been in the family temporarily. As if my departure was some kind of betrayal rather than a long overdue acknowledgement of reality. I don't think that's necessary, I tell Patricia, but thank you for letting me know. She nods and slides the folder back into her desk drawer. Sometimes people need closure, she says. But sometimes closure is just another word for one more chance to manipulate. You know your situation better than anyone. I walk out of Patricia's office feeling oddly light, as if I've set down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. My phone buzzes with a text from David. Papers signed? I type back. Yes, all finished. His response comes quickly. I'm sorry it came to this. I stare at the message for a long time before responding. I'm not. And I realize, as I send those words, that I mean them completely. I'm not sorry that my marriage ended. I'm not sorry that I finally stood up for myself. I'm not sorry that I stopped allowing myself to be used as a financial resource by people who never valued me as a person. I'm only sorry that it took me 15 years to find my spine. That evening, I'm sitting on my front porch, my porch now, legally and completely, when a familiar car pulls into my driveway. Monica gets out, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who's rehearsed what they're about to say. She looks older than I remember, more worn down, and I feel a flicker of sympathy before reminding myself that Monica is 45 years old and perfectly capable of managing her own life without my emotional labor. Sarah, she says, climbing the porch steps with a tentative smile. I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I gesture to the empty chair beside me, the one where David used to sit when we'd watch the sunset together. What can I do for you, Monica? She settles into the chair with a small sigh, and for a moment we sit in silence. The evening air is soft and warm, carrying the scent of the jasmine that blooms along my fence line. It's peaceful in a way that Sunday dinners at Eleanor's house never were. I wanted to talk to you before everything becomes final, Monica says eventually. I know things have been complicated between us lately. Complicated. It's such a neutral word for 15 years of financial exploitation disguised as family love. I'm listening, I say, keeping my voice neutral. Monica takes a deep breath, and I can see her gathering courage for whatever speech she's prepared. I know you think we've taken advantage of you, she begins, and I want you to know that was never our intention. We've always considered you family, Sarah. Real family. And when family helps each other, it's not about keeping track of who pays for what. I feel that old familiar tug, the desire to make this easier for her, to smooth over the discomfort and pretend that her words make everything okay. But I've learned to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it. When have you helped me, Monica? I ask quietly. She blinks, clearly not expecting the question. What do you mean? You said family helps each other. When have you helped me with anything? We've always been there for you emotionally, when you needed support or someone to talk to. When was the last time you called to ask how I was doing? Not to ask for something, just to check in? The silence stretches between us, and I can see Monica mentally scrolling through our interactions, looking for examples of emotional support that don't exist. "You never seemed like you needed anything," she says finally, and there's a defensive edge to her voice now. "You always had everything together. Your job, your house, your savings. You were the stable one." Everyone needs something, Monica. Friendship, emotional support, to feel valued for who they are rather than what they can provide. I needed those things too. "We did value you. You valued my credit card. There's a difference." Monica's face flushes red, and I can see her fighting between embarrassment and anger. "That's not fair," she says. "Yes, you helped us financially sometimes, but that was your choice. No one forced you to pay for anything." "You're right, it was my choice, and now I'm making different choices." "But we're family." The words explode out of her with more desperation than anger. "You can't just decide we're not family anymore because you're angry about money." "I'm not angry about money, Monica. I'm tired of being treated like an ATM with feelings. We never. 6 months ago, I overheard you talking to Jake about how pathetic I was for trying to buy my way into the family. You said money was money, but blood was blood, and that I'd never be real family no matter how much I contributed." Monica's face goes completely pale, and I can see the memory hitting her like a physical blow. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she whispers. "No, I wasn't, but I did, and it was the truth, wasn't it? All those years of calling me sister, all those family dinners and holiday gatherings, and you never actually considered me part of the family." Monica opens her mouth to argue, then closes it again. We both know there's no point in lying anymore. "I was having a bad day," she says eventually. "I was stressed about money and took it out on you. People say things they don't mean when they're upset." "Except you did mean it. And honestly, Monica, that's okay. Blood is different from marriage, and you have every right to prioritize your biological family over your brother's wife. But I also have the right to stop pretending that relationship is something it isn't." Monica is quiet for a long moment, and when she speaks again, her voice is small and uncertain. "So what happens now? Do we just never speak again?" It's a fair question, and I don't have an easy answer. These people have been the center of my social world for 15 years. Eleanor's house has been my second home. Monica and Jake have been my siblings-in-law, and their children have been my nieces and nephews. Walking away from them means walking away from the only family structure I've known since my parents died. But staying means accepting a relationship built on false premises, where my value is always conditional on my usefulness. "I don't know," I say honestly. "I don't hate any of you, but I can't go back to the way things were." "What if things could be different?" Monica asks, and there's something almost pleading in her voice. "What if we could start over, be better about including you and not just when we need help?" For a moment I feel that old familiar hope flickering in my chest. The possibility that maybe this conversation could be the beginning of a real relationship based on genuine affection rather than financial convenience. But then I remember 15 years of birthday parties where I was expected to bring gifts but never received any. 15 years of family photos where I was positioned on the edges, always slightly apart from the blood relatives. 15 years of conversations that stopped when I entered the room, inside jokes I was never included in, plans that were made without me until someone remembered they might need my financial contribution. I don't think you can change 15 years of family dynamics because you finally got caught being honest about how you really feel, I say gently. And I don't think I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to earn acceptance from people who have already decided I don't belong. Monica's shoulders sag as if I've deflated something inside her, and I feel a moment of genuine sadness for both of us. She's losing her reliable problem solver, and I'm losing the only family I've had for most of my adult life. But some losses are necessary for growth. Mom's really hurt, Monica says quietly. She keeps asking what she did wrong, why you won't visit her anymore. It's another guilt trip, gentler than the others, but still designed to make me responsible for Eleanor's emotional well-being. For a moment I consider explaining Eleanor's role in the family dynamic, how her Sunday dinners had been performances where I paid admission through my contributions and availability. But Eleanor is 73 and recovering from heart surgery. There's nothing to be gained by forcing her to confront the ways she'd enabled her children's treatment of me. Eleanor didn't do anything wrong, I say, which is both true and not true. I hope she recovers quickly and has many good years ahead. Monica nods, seeming to understand that this is as much closure as she's going to get. She stands up slowly, smoothing down her skirt with nervous hands. I hope you'll be happy, she says, and I think she might actually mean it. I hope you will be too. After Monica leaves, I sit on my porch until full dark, listening to the sounds of my neighborhood settling into evening. Dogs barking, children being called in for baths, the distant hum of air conditioners working against the Arizona heat. It's peaceful in a way I'd forgotten life could be. No undercurrent of tension, no waiting for the next request for financial help, no carefully calculating how much I could afford to contribute to someone else's crisis. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. This is Tyler. Aunt Monica said you and Uncle David are getting divorced. I wanted to say thank you for all the times you helped me over the years. You didn't have to do that, and I'm grateful. I stare at the message for a long time. Tyler is Monica's son, the nephew I'd helped support through college, the one whose medical bills had been the final test of my boundaries. He's 24 now, starting his career as a physical therapist, building a life that I'd had a small part in making possible. I type back, "You're welcome, Tyler. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I hope you have a wonderful life." His response comes quickly. "I hope you do too, and I'm sorry if my family wasn't always good to you. You deserved better." I read those words 3 times, feeling something tight in my chest finally relax. Tyler sees it. At least one person in David's family understands that I deserved better than I got, that my departure isn't selfish abandonment, but long overdue self-preservation. It's a small thing, but it feels like absolution. The next morning, I wake up alone in my own house, for the first time since David and I separated. He'd moved out completely yesterday while I was at the lawyer's office, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind 15 years of shared memories embedded in furniture and photographs and kitchen appliances. The house feels different without his presence, emptier, but also somehow more mine. I can hear my own thoughts without the constant background hum of worry about his family's needs, their expectations, their latest crisis that might require my attention or my wallet. I make coffee in my kitchen and sit at my table, looking out at my backyard, where the morning light is painting everything gold. For the first time in months, I don't check my phone to see if anyone needs anything from me. I just sit and drink my coffee and watch the birds at my feeder, feeling something that might be contentment. My doorbell rings at 9:30, and I open it to find Eleanor standing on my front porch. She looks frail but determined, leaning heavily on a walker and breathing slightly hard from the effort of getting from her car to my door. "Eleanor," I say, genuinely surprised. "How did you get here?" "Uber," she says with a shaky smile. "Turns out you don't need family to get places when you're willing to pay for a ride." It's such a pointed comment that I almost laugh, but Eleanor's expression is serious, almost stern. "Can I come in?" she asks. "I think we need to talk." I hesitate for a moment, knowing that this conversation is likely to be painful for both of us. But Eleanor has made the considerable effort to come here despite her recent surgery, and I owe her at least a hearing. I lead her to my living room, helping her settle into the comfortable chair by the window. She moves carefully, one hand pressed to her chest where I know the pacemaker has been installed, but her eyes are sharp and focused. "You look good," she says, studying my face. "Rested. Happier than you've looked in a while." I don't know what to say to that, so I just wait for her to continue. "David told me you think we never considered you real family," she says without preamble. "Is that true?" The directness of the question catches me off guard. I'd expected guilt trips and emotional manipulation, not this straightforward request for information. "Yes," I say simply. "That's true." Eleanor nods slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. "I'm 83 years old," she says. "I've buried my husband, watched my children struggle through divorces and financial problems and health scares, and I've learned that family is complicated. But I want you to know that I've always considered you my daughter-in-law, not just David's wife, but my daughter." The words hit me harder than I'd expected, and I feel tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This is what I'd wanted to hear for 15 years. Genuine acceptance, real affection, proof that my place in the family had been more than just financial convenience. But it's too late now, and we both know it. "Then why did you let them treat me like an ATM?" I ask quietly. Eleanor is silent for a long moment, and I can see her choosing her words carefully. "Because it was easier," she says finally, her voice heavy with what might be regret. "Because Monica and Jake have always struggled with money, and you seem so capable, so willing to help. Because when someone offers to solve your problems, it's easier to let them than to face the problems yourself. It's the most honest thing anyone in David's family has said to me in 15 years. I knew it wasn't fair to you," Eleanor continues, "especially after I heard Monica and Jake talking about how you were trying to buy your way in. I should have said something then, should have made it clear that you belonged in our family, regardless of what you contributed financially." "Why didn't you?" Eleanor's laugh is bitter and sad. "Because I'm a coward. Because I didn't want to deal with Monica's anger or Jake's resentment or the uncomfortable conversations about money and fairness and who owes what to whom. Because it was easier to let you keep solving everyone's problems than to force my children to grow up and solve their own." I stare at her, this elderly woman who has just admitted to enabling 15 years of financial and emotional exploitation because it was convenient for her family. "Do you understand why I can't be part of this anymore?" I ask. "Yes," Eleanor says without hesitation. "I understand completely, and I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry that we took advantage of your generosity and your need to belong. I'm sorry that we let you pay for 15 years of family membership while never actually giving you what you were paying for. It's the apology I'd never expected to receive, and it's both healing and heartbreaking." Eleanor understands exactly what happened, exactly how her family failed me, and she's owning that failure without making excuses or shifting blame. But understanding and apology don't undo 15 years of damage. "What happens now?" Eleanor asks, echoing Monica's question from the night before. "I don't know," I say honestly. "I don't hate any of you, but I can't go back to being who I was in that family dynamic." Eleanor nods, seeming to accept that this is as much closure as either of us can expect. "Will you be happy?" she asks, the same question Monica had posed. "I think so," I say, and realize that I mean it. For the first time in a long time, I think I might actually be happy. Eleanor smiles, and for a moment she looks like the woman who used to make apple pie and tell stories about David's childhood, before family dynamics and financial obligations complicated everything. "Good," she says. "You deserve to be happy, Sarah. You always did." After Eleanor leaves, I sit in my quiet house and think about deserving happiness. For so long, I'd believed that happiness was something I had to earn through service to others, that contentment came from being useful and needed and appreciated. I thought that if I just gave enough, cared enough, contributed enough, eventually I'd be rewarded with the unconditional love and acceptance I craved. But happiness, I'm learning, isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a choice you make about how to live your life, about what you're willing to accept, and what you're brave enough to change. I'm choosing happiness now, even if it means choosing it alone. That afternoon, I do something I haven't done in 15 years. I make plans that have nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. I call a travel agent and book a trip to Italy. Something I've dreamed about for decades but never did, because there was always a family crisis that required my attention or my money. I'm going to spend 2 weeks in Tuscany, staying in a small hotel in a hill town whose name I can barely pronounce. I'm going to eat gelato for breakfast and drink wine at lunch, and take cooking classes from Italian grandmothers who will teach me to make pasta by hand. I'm going to walk through vineyards and olive groves and medieval churches. And I'm going to do it all without worrying about who might need me while I'm gone. It feels decadent and terrifying and absolutely necessary. My phone rings while I'm researching restaurants in Florence, and I see David's name on the screen. For a moment I consider letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity wins out. "The papers are all filed," he says without preamble. "It's official." "How do you feel about that?" I ask. "I don't know," he admits. "Sad, I guess. Like I failed at something important." There's a long silence, and I can hear him breathing on the other end of the line, working up to something. "My family wants to have one last dinner with you," he says eventually. Before you're not part of the family anymore." I close my laptop and lean back in my chair, considering the request. Part of me is curious about what such a dinner would look like. Would they apologize? Would they finally acknowledge the ways they'd taken advantage of my generosity? Would we all pretend that everything was fine and